In the news tonight, a royal court statement criticizes an article published by The Atlantic about His Majesty the King and circulated by various media outlets for including misinformation and out-of-context material. His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi bin Mohammed represents His Majesty the King at the inauguration of Pope Francis and joins world leaders to congratulate the Pope. And a suspected chemical attack near Aleppo kills 26 people as both the Syrian government and rebels trade accusations on the use of weapons of mass destruction. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. A royal court statement has criticized an article published by The Atlantic about His Majesty the King and circulated by various local, Arab and international media for including misinformation and material taken out of context. The royal court said the article contained analysis that represents the author's personal viewpoint as well as inaccurate reporting of His Majesty's words. According to the statement, the author had interviewed King Abdullah about his reform vision, which His Majesty said came to fulfill the aspirations of Jordanians for justice, tolerance, equality and accountability. The royal court reaffirmed His Majesty the King's pride in all Jordanians and in the state's institutions, as well as his confidence in the people's true affiliation to the country and their awareness of internal and external challenges. The statement also asserted that the King highly values the role of tribesmen and tribe leaders across the nation. On Jordan's relations with Arab leaders, the statement said the kingdom has always maintained distinguished ties with them based on mutual respect and trust, adding that His Majesty looks to Arab leaders with utmost appreciation. In this context, the statement referred to the King's recent visit to Turkey and to his continued coordination and consultation with Egypt's leadership on various Arab and regional issues. Jordanians' alertness and the wisdom of the leadership will preserve national unity and reinforce comprehensive reforms for a better future to all, the statement assured. Finally, the statement cautioned that it is vital to differentiate between the author's analysis and His Majesty's actual remarks. His Majesty the King opened a new mosque in Ain al-Basha near Amman at a ceremony joined by senior officials. The three-story Ghazat Hashim Mosque, constructed by a Jordanian donor on a 4,000 square meter plot of land, holds up to 5,000 worshippers. The King toured the mosque, characterized by Arab Islamic architectural design, manifest in the arches and windows, as well as interior and exterior work. The mosque has 2 minarets and separate prayer spaces for men and women, in addition to a center to teach Quran. The King's personal envoy and senior advisor for religious and cultural affairs, His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi bin Mohammed, represented His Majesty at the inauguration of Pope Francis, where he joined other world leaders to congratulate the Pope. In a message to the Pontiff after his election last week, King Abdullah wished him success in his noble message at the helm of the Catholic Church to enhance the values of tolerance and coexistence, promote human rights, defend peace, freedom and justice, and unite the followers of heavenly religions for the good of humanity. More on the inauguration with Zain Abu Sufa.
Under a sunny blue sky, cardinals made their way to St. Peter's Square at the Vatican to take their seats for the Mass, formally installing the new leader of the world's 1.2 billion Roman Catholics. Up to 1 million people, including political and religious leaders from around the world, crammed the square and surrounding streets for the Mass. 6 sovereigns, the U.S. Vice President, and other leaders, as well as heads of many other faiths, were among the 130 delegations on the steps of the famous Basilica. Pope Francis toured the square in an open white jeep to greet the huge crowds, in a sign of informality, abandoning the bulletproof Pope Mobile and stopping frequently to greet the crowds and kiss babies held up to him. He got out of the vehicle at one point to bless a disabled man. Since he was elected on Wednesday, the new Pope has shown an outgoing nature and sense of humor that differs notably from the much more formal Benedict. Pope Francis took his name in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, a symbol of poverty, charity, and love of nature. In his inauguration address, he called for the defense of the weakest in society and protection of the environment. Otherwise, he said, the way is open to death and destruction.
È l'avere rispetto per ogni creatura di Dio e per l'ambiente.
It means respecting each of God's creatures and respecting the environment in which we live. It means protecting people, showing loving concern for each and every person, especially children, the elderly, those in need, who are often the last we think about. To be custodians means to review our sentiments in our hearts, because it's from here that good or bad intentions come, those which build and those which destroy.
According to the faith-based think tank, Acton Institute, the Pope has tough work ahead of him.
First will be the reform of the Roman Curia, which might be boring to some people on the outside, but the Pope's evangelical mission cannot take place if he's always dealing with scandals. So naming his administrators, his staff members, especially the Secretary of State, is going to be very important. His second big challenge will be proclaiming the gospel in a world that doesn't know as much about Christianity or religion in general.
Many in the crowd said they had high hopes for a more humble papacy under Francis, who as a Jesuit has taken a vow of poverty. Zen Abu Sufa for the news at 10.
Prime Minister-designate Abdullah Mansour met Secretaries General of political parties and heads of refugee camp service and advisory committees after wrapping up marathon dialogue with lawmakers in his bid to form a new government. He said that advancing political life one that rises to the level of landmark national achievements as a main feature of the next era. Mansour said he would promote a balanced relationship between the government and the lower house of parliament, pledging to help the legislature to succeed and upgrade its performance to restore public confidence. He stressed that a strong government and weak house, or vice versa, will not be helpful to the country. He told the party chiefs that there will be no healthy parliamentary life without a strong and serious partisan engagement in society, and to achieve this, there's a need for a modernized parties law. Lower House Speaker Saad Hail Sroor received Jordan's Press Association President Tariq al-Momani along with some association members who congratulated him for his election as House Speaker. During the meeting in his office, they held discussions of the lower house and media's relationship, along with a number of legislation issues. Sroor said the media has a key role to play in national issues, namely an oversight role, urging for accurate, truth-seeking, objective and transparent reporting and coverage of news. He said the House and the media are allies, and both should work for the good of the higher interests of the country. Two public security officers were killed early today during a police raid in the southern city of Ma'an to arrest the main suspect in the killing of an officer last year. The Public Security Department said in a statement the suspected killer of First Lieutenant Ayman Miqdadi had also led a four-man armed and masked gang that attacked a military post in the DC region last week. Acting on a tip received by the Ma'an Operation Room, officers ringed the hideout in a densely populated area of the city. During a shootout, 2 officers were killed by gang bullets, and 2 members of the armed group, including the main suspect in Miqdadi's killing, were fatally wounded and later died in hospital. Syria's Information Minister Omran Zabi said the Syrian armed forces would never use internationally banned weapons, not now, nor at any other time. The minister said in a televised news conference, even if the country had chemical weapons, it would never use them due to moral, humanitarian and political reasons. His statement came after the government and rebels accused each other of launching a deadly chemical attack near Aleppo. The minister described the attack as a dangerous escalation and said the rocket was launched from Aleppo's southeastern district of Nirab Nayrab, part of which is held by rebels. According to government sources, rebels had fired a rocket carrying chemical agents that killed 25 people, including 16 soldiers, and wounded 86. A senior rebel commander denied the claim and blamed government forces for the alleged chemical strike. Here's more on the fatal attack.
A possible chemical attack in Syria. Syrian officials and rebels accused each other of launching a chemical rocket attack near Aleppo Tuesday. Syrian TV aired images of what it said were casualties taken to hospitals, saying 25 were killed and many dozens more wounded.
They hit us with chemical weapons. The terrorists attacked us, those bastards. May God punish them. They are not men.
The Syrian government condemned the attack, but a senior rebel commander in Aleppo accused the government of firing the chemical rocket. And in Istanbul, opposition leaders disavowed the use of chemical weapons, adding they need to assess the situation. Syrian National Coalition spokesman Khaled Saleh.
We have received some news which is not confirmed with the command of the Syrian army, that some chemical weapons are used by the Free Syrian Army. We are contacting the Free Syrian Army to see if this information is correct, and we are going to deal with this issue.
White House spokesperson Jay Carney said the U.S. was monitoring the allegations closely.
We are deeply skeptical of a regime that has lost all credibility, and we would also warn the regime against making these kinds of charges as any kind of pretext or cover for its use of chemical weapons.
If confirmed, Tuesday's chemical attack would be the first use of such weapons in the two-year conflict.
Russia, for its part, described the use of chemical weapons by the Syrian rebels as extremely alarming and dangerous development. A foreign ministry statement said Russia is seriously concerned that weapons of mass destruction are falling into the hands of the rebels, which would worsen the situation and elevate confrontation to a new level. In Vienna, Director General of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, said they had no independent information about any use of such arms in Syria, but that the organization is closely monitoring the situation. Ahmad Uzumju was addressing a seminar by the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. He said the organization would look at media reports and identify the symptoms that may be detected to make an assessment. And back here at home, a total of 1,455 Syrian refugees have entered the kingdom through various border points in the last 24 hours. Jordan Armed Forces officials who received the refugees said they mostly included children, women, and elderly. In Turkey, meanwhile, the Syrian opposition coalition elected Ghassan Hito as the prime minister of the interim government to establish a coherent and inclusive political body to administer the opposition-held areas of northern Syria. Hito, a communications executive, lived in the United States for decades and recently moved to Turkey. 6 candidates were nominated for the position of prime minister, but after long discussions, Hito was elected as a transitional prime minister at the end of the meeting. The election followed 2 failed attempts to form an interim cabinet due to the group's infighting since the uprising against Bashar al-Assad's rule started 2 years ago. On the 10th anniversary of the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, 8 dozen car bombs and suicide blasts tore into Shiite districts across Baghdad and south of the capital, killing scores of people. No group claimed responsibility for the blasts. In a sign of security concern, the Iraqi cabinet postponed local elections in 2 provinces, Anbar and Ninawa, for up to 6 months because of threats to electoral workers. The polls will go ahead in other provinces on April 20th. We get more on the coordinated blasts in this report.
A series of coordinated blasts hit Shiite districts across Baghdad and south of the Iraqi capital on Tuesday, killing at least 50 people. Another 160 people or more were wounded, according to hospital officials. The attacks come on the 10-year anniversary of the U.S.-led invasion that ousted Saddam Hussein. Tuesday's car bombs exploded near a busy Baghdad market. close to the heavily fortified Green Zone and in other districts across the city. A young bus driver named Ali witnessed one of the blasts. The blast happened suddenly, he says. One of the passengers who was sitting beside me was seriously wounded because of shrapnel. My assistant was also wounded, he says. He was taken to hospital. A decade after U.S. and Western troops swept into Iraq, the country still struggles with a stubborn insurgency, sectarian friction, and political instability. Sunni Islamist insurgents linked to al-Qaeda have stepped up attacks on Shiite targets since the start of the year, in an effort to stoke sectarian tension and undermine Shiite Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's government.
And in an interview with China's Central Television, Iraq's Prime Minister spoke about the main challenges facing the country as well as security concerns.
The region is witnessing a lot of turmoil, and this has created an unfortunate atmosphere in which terrorism and terrorist organizations have flourished. This is our major concern, and because we are building a stable Iraq, we want to concentrate on the reconstruction of Iraq. This is why we are putting all our efforts into protecting Iraq from any outside influence. This is within our policy of non-interference. We neither interfere with others, nor do we want others to interfere with us. We have different groups, Sunnis, Shias, and Turkmens, and there are some people who want to export the crisis to Iraq. We have dealt with the demonstrations gently. We guaranteed the protesters freedoms, we allowed them to protest, and we didn't use state power. But we are concerned that they may change from peaceful demonstrations into armed conflict with the police and the authorities.
In London, hundreds protested outside Parliament to demand the UK does more to tackle tax avoidance and live up to its promise to increase aid to the world's poorest countries. The protest came a day before Britain's Finance Minister George Osborne delivered his 2013 budget to Parliament. The protest movement is a coalition of 120 charities working together for the first time since the Make Poverty History campaign 8 years ago. They called for an increase in life-saving aid to the world's poorest countries and also demanded the minister to crack down on tax dodging corporations, especially big businesses who work in poor countries. Osborne now ranks as Britain's least popular chancellor in almost 20 years.
The British government is chair of the G8, so the 8 most powerful nations in the world, and if together they create new global rules on tax and accountancy, that would benefit Britain, so it would stop companies like Starbucks avoiding tax, but it would also benefit the poorest countries in the world because they can use these new international rules to make sure that companies pay tax. So Britain is key to doing that this year with the G8.
Former England striker Michael Owen announced he will retire at the end of the season. Owen's career was launched into orbit by a stunning goal against Argentina in the 1998 World Cup. He made his first team debut for Liverpool as 17-year-old and also played for Real Madrid, Newcastle United and Manchester United. Last September, he joined Stoke City. Owen made 89 international appearances, scoring 40 goals to sit fourth on the all-time England goal scorers list. Another famous England performance came in the 5-1 World Cup qualifying win in Germany in 2001 when he scored a hat-trick. The International Olympic Committee continued its inspection of venues included in Madrid's 2020 Olympic bid. Madrid is competing with Istanbul and Tokyo for the Games and is bidding for a third consecutive time after failing previous times. 28 of the 35 planned venues are already built, while around 40% of tickets will cost less than €40. According to an initial estimate, the Madrid Olympics would cost around €1.5 billion, plus another $150 million for services such as health and security. On Thursday, the Commission will share their impressions of the bid. And finally, for a quick look at the weather, it continues to be cold and partly cloudy tonight with northeasterly moderate winds and a chance for light showers. A slight rise in temperature is expected tomorrow, creating moderate weather conditions in most regions. In the Gulf of Aqaba, moderate and partly cloudy weather prevails with northerly moderate to fresh winds and calm seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, is a reminder of the day's top stories. A royal court statement criticizes an article published by The Atlantic about His Majesty the King and circulated by various media outlets for including misinformation and out-of-context material. His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi bin Mohammed represents His Majesty the King at the inauguration of Pope Francis and joins world leaders to congratulate the Pope. And a suspected chemical attack near Aleppo kills 26 people as both the Syrian government and rebels trade accusations on the use of weapons of mass destruction. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.